Good evening, good morning, good day, wherever you are, whatever time you are watching this video. My name is Mjuketi Mtombeni. Guys, I'm going to be telling you about my story, about my grandmother actually. So, she was a traditional healer. She was a talented traditional healer, but more often than not, people used to ask her to do things, that are not, I can say, not normally done by traditional healers. Like she used to cross the boundaries. You know what I mean, Mosna? So, the story I'm just going to tell you now, it's a story that is the very... Actually, there was a lot of... actually a lot of stories, a lot of things that happened during that period. That actually, I think it's time now that I tell it to people that are interested in hearing these stories, because I believe that now, since from then until now, I haven't actually seen someone as talented as her, you see, in terms of traditional healing and, sorcery and all those things, you see. So there were a lot of them during that time, because I'm talking about the 80s now. I'm talking about the 70s, because I was born in 1972. So the only stories that the earliest I could remember, it's somewhere in the late 70s, probably around 75, 76. I remember the uprising, even though we were told to stay at home and the gate was locked, but I still remember some of the events happening leading up to that and after that, But I'm going to tell you some of the stories, not exactly about the uprising. The uprising will be a part of the story, but it's not exactly about it. So, I remember in the okay, I'm just going to first tell you about but okay, let me, like I've explained that now, I've introduced myself already. Yes, my name is Mjuketi Mtombeni. So, I'm just going to tell you about my family first, you understand? So that at least you know who's who in the whole story, you see. Right, the things that now you must be asking yourself, why is this guy covering his face? Why can't he? Well, that's a very good question. I cannot deny that. But now, you see, some of the stories I'm going to be telling now, I don't feel, because I feel like someone who has been affected by this story, my grandmother's deeds, might recognize the story as something that happened to them. And if I meet them on the street, it's not going to be a good thing, you see. So that's why I feel, because it actually took a lot for me to actually come out and say, I just want to tell this story. And without wasting too much time, I just want to actually first tell you who's who in my family. Right, as far as I could remember, there used to be my grandfather who was the head of the household, Mr. Mtombeni. He was a truck driver. He was away all of the time, most of the time. He used to come back probably around month end. Sometimes 2 months will pass without him coming back home. Sometimes we will wake up in the morning, he's there, So he always used to be away all of the time. Then it was my grandmother, Matema, but she was married to Mtombeni. So some people know as Mam Mtombeni, some as Matema, depending, especially in Mpumalanga at home. She was known as Matema, but this side in Johannesburg, she's known as Mam Mtombeni. So they had 3 kids. So it was first my mother, Agnes. She was the firstborn. Then it was my uncle, the secondborn, who's Solomon. Then the lastborn, who was my grandmother's favorite of all, fun saying. He was a very interesting character. I'll actually tell you a few things about him. Then on my mother, it was my older brother. He's late now. He was born in 1970. And then it's me. Then I was born in 1972. Then my mother remarried some guy who was from the northwest, Mr. Moilwa. So they had my sister in 1978. They got a house in Fort Loras, and then they were living there up until she passed on in 2019. But when she passed on, she was actually living with me here at home. So, right in the early days, my grandfather, he was an interesting character, because I think when I was in sub A, sub B, or when I started schooling, no, just before I could start schooling in the 70s, he actually retired somewhere along those years, you know. So then he was with us at home. I think when I was doing sub B, which is grade 2 now, he actually passed on. So, yeah, my grandmother used to be a domestic worker. My mother was also a domestic worker. My father, whom I know very little about, because he used to come maybe once or twice a year, he was working in a mine in the west end of Johannesburg. So, yes, and then, yeah, my grandmother was a traditional healer. So she used to work as a domestic worker, but she used to work part-time because she used to come in some certain days she's at work, some days she's at home. She had some sort of a schedule, but I cannot remember how her schedule was. And then she used to work for a guy called Mr. Furman. Now, Mr. Furman, he was working at Hillbrow Hospital. He was some medical professional. I'm not sure what he was doing there. And then there was, Mr. Furman. We used to call him Fairmama. So my grandmother used to refer to him as Fairmama. So we also used to call him Fairmama. But I ended up seeing a letter written by him. Then that's when I found that is actually Mr. D. Fairman. And then, my mother also used to work for a Jewish family, because she used to cook this Jewish food, you know, but I cannot really tell you much because my mother was always away as well. And then my Uncle Solomon used to work for a company, a tire company. So I don't really know what they were doing there. I think they were distributing tires, I'm just not sure. But that guy, we never really knew what he was doing with his money, you know. Even though he was working, but I really cannot tell you much. Then it was Solomon. It was the youngest uncle, my grandmother's youngest son, Fanseni. Fanseni, he only worked once in his life. Well, when I was alive, when he was alive, as far as I know, let me say. So he worked for a construction company. They built Carlton Center in Johannesburg, 1986 or 5. I just don't remember, somewhere there. But he didn't work much. I mean, it took to build Carlton Center a few months, but I think he must have worked maybe a month and a half or 2 months, somewhere there. But most of the time he was actually into gaming. Because at that time, there's a game here in Soweto. I'm not sure if it's there in other townships. It's called Madais. So Madais is actually, it's a gambling. It's a game. You know, you bet with your money. You can either win or lose. But most of the time, it's played by people that are working, especially guys that are getting weekly wages or fortnight wages. In some instances, people that are getting monthly payment, but he was not employed. And some of the guys that used to actually dominate the game is taxi drivers. They had a daily income. And yeah, he used to win a lot. He used to lose sometimes, get desperate for money, but also there were days that he used to win, and we would eat nice, we would eat foods, things that there was a sponge cake, there was a red cake, there was Musoko buns. So some of the things that were eaten by, well-off people. Now, in this particular story that I'm going to start with, this which is the closest to my heart. So, in the area where I used to live in Soweto, I think it was the fourth house from my house. There lived a gentleman called Mr. Mbani. Mr. Mbani is a guy from the Eastern Cape. So he was very educated, even though I cannot tell you what qualification he had. But I knew that he was an educated man because he used to work for a bank. If I'm not mistaken, once he worked for a PEM bank. I'm not sure if he did move to another bank or something like that, but I remember seeing some of the PEM bank documents at his home. So I actually befriended his daughter. The daughter, it was the second boy. He had 2 daughters. So at his family, Mr. Mbani, it was him, his wife. We used to call his wife Mama. I never knew her name. Because Nomapongo, who was the second born, who was my friend, that was her mother. She used to refer to her as Mama. Then I also ended up referring to Miss Mbani as Mama. I never knew her name. Then Tatumbani, people used to refer to him as Tatumbani. But as I got used to him, so I used to call him Tata as well, which means father. Then Tatumbani had a daughter, the eldest daughter. I don't know, I just don't remember how old was she at that time. But I remember she just started a teacher's college. The story I'm talking about happened in 1980. And can you believe now it's 42 years exactly, but it still hasn't left my mind because it had an impact in my life, you know. So Tatumbani used to send me to the shop. I was more like a son because he wanted nothing with his daughter, Noma Bong. Noma Bong was very, very beautiful, to be honest with you. So, and Tatumbani wanted no one near Noma Bong. So I was the only, because at that time I was 8 years old. So Noma Bong, I remember she celebrated her 16th year birthday that year, 1980. I prefer it. Now, what happens is that now we normally used to go to shops. You know, I used to go with her to the shops. We buy. We normally used to be together, and sometimes I will play soccer with my friends. She will come back to school and call me. We will then be together. Most of the time, she was always in the house. She didn't know many people. She didn't know many areas. You know, she only knew areas where me and her used to go to. Me and her used to go to then. She didn't know so many people. She didn't know many areas, you know. Now, what happened is that now there was a time where there was a gentleman by the name of, I forgot the guy's name, but his nickname was Bogart. Now, Bogart was interested in Noma Bong, so I remember he actually noticed that now I was actually close to the family. Because Tatumbani actually didn't know, he didn't like a lot of people, you know. Tatumbani was one of those people that were self-centered, you know. Because he was educated, I remember in the bank, he used to work with checks, you know. I think he used to sign off checks or he used to investigate checks, something like that that had to do with checks. So, he saw himself as above everyone, you understand? So he never liked poor people, you know. Like my grandmother, he actually despised my grandmother and my grandfather. I actually don't remember a time where when him and my grandmother him and my grandfather were like having conversation, even though they were like 4 houses away. Four houses are away from each other, but I just don't really, my grandfather, remember, he never liked the gentleman. So my grandmother, I never really disliked him, but because the actions that Mr. Mbani used to make. But now, my grandmother used to say to me, that's how educated people act. So that's what I thought, maybe if you are educated, you just don't see anyone as a human, you understand? So that's, but actually later on I realized that no, it's not like that. Myself, I have a Bachelor of Commerce degree and a postgraduate diploma, but I'm just not like that, you know. So it's actually not true, you see. Now, yes, what happened is that now this gentleman Bogart, he was actually not that close to my uncle Solomon, but he was a bit close to Solomon. So what happened is that now, he noticed that actually most of the time I was used to Noma Bong. So what he said to me now, he gave me a letter and said to me, I need to give it to Noma Bong. So he said to me, no, if you give Noma Bong this letter, I will give you 10 cents. Well, 10 cents was a lot of money at that time. In 1980, it was a lot of money. Right, because my pocket money at that time was 10 cents. So him giving me 10 cents, it was, at 8 years old, it was a lot of money because there were sweets that I used to buy for half cent. And you can ask yourself how much was 10 cents you can buy with half cent. Then he gave me the letter to give to Noma Bong. So I knew that now, if Noma Bong's father can find this letter, I'll be in trouble. So what I did is that I didn't have an underwear at that time, so I actually put it inside my trouser, you know. So here I was with Noma Bong, but I actually forgotten about the letter. So here I was playing with Noma Bong at her bedroom, in the bedroom. So we were playing, I don't remember what we were playing. So the letter fell to the ground. So she asked me, what is that? Then I was like, yeah, someone said I must give it to you. Who said I must give it to you? Okay, let me see. So she opened the letter. she started reading. I was actually not much into read. I was actually not yet able to read at that time. Yes, she started reading. In some of the parts, she used to read aloud. Even though I could slightly understand, but I could not fully understand what it was about. Some of the parts of that, she used to laugh on her own. I think she enjoyed the letter. And then later on, she said to me, "Who gave you this letter?" I said, "No, there's a guy, Bogart. He lives in such and such house." "No, I don't know." I said, "No, man, there's a such guy. Remember when we were passing, there was a guy who said, 'No, I don't know.'" He said, "No, you know what, make sure that now, whenever you see this guy, please make sure that you show me this guy." I think a few days passed. I think there was a time where we were playing the yard. Yes, we were playing in the yard, me and her. We were playing with tennis ball, I remember. So Bogart was actually speaking with some gentleman in the distance. So I actually remember, then I actually spoke to her, and I told her, "You know what, there's the gentleman that actually sent me to you." Then she said, "Oh, okay. No, I don't know the gentleman. I've seen him a few times, but I don't really know this gentleman." I don't remember what happened after that. I think we continued playing. I remember, I think it was a day or two after that. After school, she called me and said to me, "You know what, take this letter and give it to that gentleman." Then I took that letter. Then later on, I went to Bogart. I gave it to Bogart. Then Bogart said, "Yes, you are a good guy." Then he said, "My boy." Then he gave me my 10 cents. I was so happy. Then I remember I was buying sweets and whatever, bought a lot of things. Even at school, I was able to buy chips. And then later on, there was another letter that Bogart gave to me. I gave it to Nomapong. I remember Nomapong was always smiling while reading this letter. I remember there was a back and forth of letters a few times, 7, 8 times. I just don't remember, or even more. Then came a time where, just after the letters, came a time where Nomapong lied to her father and said there was, I think some function or a concert at the school. Only to find that now, her and Bogart, they were actually going to a concert in Mfulo Park, which is what later known as Five Roses. I think even today it's known as Five Roses, but it's no longer as a bigger place that it used to be during those years. I think they went there. I don't know if there was a concert there. I'm not sure. Then they came back. I think when they came back, I think they were at the corner somewhere talking. I think there was someone that saw them there. So I don't know how it came. I don't know who told Nomapong's father about this relationship. He was not happy. I remember he did ask me if Nomapong is seeing someone. But knowing that now there's going to be trouble, I told him, "No, I know nothing about that, you see." He said to me, "Just try and see if there's anyone." I told him, "No, I don't know anything." But later on, he started accusing my uncle of being in a relationship with Nomapong. I'm not sure what led to that. I'm just not sure. Maybe someone told me it's my uncle. I'm just not sure what happened. I remember he started whenever he passes my home, he will talk aloud, speaking about my family, how bad they are. He started not wanting me at his home. But well, my grandmother never took it much. She never took it serious. She always said to me, "No, you know how educated people. She never took him serious. So I think that actually the lack of the lack of attention from my family, which she thought maybe would get attention so that they can separate the relationship. So my grandmother never took it serious. So I think it frustrated Mr. Mbani in such a way that now, what ended up happening is that now, you see, it was in 1980. So what happened is that now, in 1976, during the uprising, there was, in my era, there was a white doctor that was, I think he was passing or something like that. So there was a group of people that actually attacked that doctor. I think he ended up passing on to the stones that were held at him. I don't know what happened exactly. And then he ended up passing on. Some of the guys were arrested, but they never arrested all of them. So they were still looking for other people that were involved. So what he said, what that man did, he wrote a letter to some of the guys that are topping the police, during the apartheid times at that time, saying that now he's got some information as a person was involved in the attack of the doctor. So he's got information. I think he gave them our address, and he gave them my uncle's name. So then we were woken up one time, woken up by these huge guys, I don't remember if it was a Brixton murder and robbery unit, but it was some police unit. They came to my home at that time. So they were looking for my uncle. They took my uncle in handcuffs. They were clapping him, He was actually, what have I done? But they actually took him. My grandmother wanted to, find out what's happening. They kept on pushing her away. Go, grandma, go. They took my uncle. I remember he was tortured because when he came back, he was actually having, pains everywhere, So I think he was tortured, being questioned, interrogated about his whereabouts during that time, So that actually affected my grandmother, deeply, because she ended up not going to work, skipping some of the work days. So I think after a week, 2 weeks, she did get a strength, to go to work. But when she was at work, I'm just not sure what happened. I think maybe she was not concentrating. Then she ended up explaining and relating the whole story to her employer, Mr. Furman. Now, upon understanding the whole story, Mr. Furman, what he did, he actually wrote a letter too. Then he wrote the letter, I don't know to who, but one of the top guys as well, explaining the whole situation, the relationship and what happened, why the letter was written and things like that. I think they ended up asking my uncle some of the questions, of which the answers, they were actually related to what, they aligned to what Mr. Furman was explaining on the letter. I think they ended up letting my uncle go after understanding what was happening. So, then he came back home. I remember he had so many injuries, he just could not move. He was complaining about pains on his hands after the torture. He couldn't walk properly, So, my grandmother, gave him treatment until he was alright. But my grandmother was not happy about that because he ended up having a different attitude towards Mr. Mbani. So Mr. Mbani was like happy, I'll teach you a lesson and things like that. Whenever he passes by my home, he will, hell insults, and he will say, yeah, you are the untouchables and whatever, And then, I remember then me and Nomapong, I remember she used to teach me some of the things at school. Because I remember I used to do and redo my school work with her. Because I remember that year, around December time, I became number 1 in the whole class, So I remember then, we were celebrating, me and her, but we could not do things at her home because things were no longer, I was no longer allowed to her home. So came December time. Now, during the 70s, during the 70s and the 80s, during December time, a lot of people used to pack, and go, to the lands. What do they used to call the homelands at that time? Because most people here in Johannesburg were here to work. So during December time, they organized transport, and then so that man had a car. He had a car and Mercedes-Benz. Now, in December, I remember they were packing. Like you normally used to do, like in December, they were packing some of the things. Some of the years I used to help them pack. Then they would give me like maybe a plastic full of cakes, and I'll enjoy the cakes throughout the days after that. They were packing things there, and then they were preparing to leave. And then I think they left. I couldn't even have I couldn't say a nice goodbye to my friend Mama Bong. So I think they were packing. I think because of the looks from Tatumbani, I ended up, not. So I ended up leaving. So I think they left that day. They left going home. The whole family. I think there was also another relative, if I'm not mistaken. So normally when they leave in December, they will then come back in January. Maybe maybe a week or few days before the schools reopen. So, but strange enough, that year they came back. That year they instead of coming back in January, there were some of the families that came back just before Christmas. They were starting packing some of the things there. I think one of the neighbors asked them, what happened? What happened to the family? We were told that they had an accident. All of them died. My heart was so sore, all of my memories with Mama Bongo, it was... but during that time, I really knew that my grandmother had to do with it, So I remember I asked my grandmother, Grandma, have you heard what happened to that family? Then I remember she said something to the likes of, they will learn the lesson as to who they are messing up with. I think she said something to those lines. Then I know my grandmother, if she says something like this, if she doesn't feel any sympathy towards a situation, she most likely has something to do with it, I don't know, I cannot tell you what, but the way things were happening, I think she must have well be innocent, but knowing my grandmother, I know what she used to do. So then they passed on. Then I started thinking to myself, there's a saying in Zulu that says that now, it says that now the actions of one sheep, they sometimes result in the death of all sheep. So, that saying actually represents this whole situation. Since then, I haven't forgotten about this situation. I remember Bogart was also sad as well. He was sad for months, if not years, he was actually affected by that because it was during the time where, they were like lovebirds, So, yeah, that's what happened. There were stories that happened during that time when I was with my grandmother, because I remember she used to have a monkey around the 80s as well that used to live. She used to look it out, and I'll tell you more about that one as well. There were people that would come into her, with different problems. Because I remember there was a lady that used to live in Deep Kloof. She had a problem of having children at that time. I think she had a problem with the family of the husband because she was not having children. Something to that effect. It happened somewhere in the 80s. She did help as well. But I'll tell you the whole story later on in another video. And then there was a gentleman also who was being bewitched in Pretoria. I'll tell you also that story as well. I'll tell you a story, or another story that was actually close to my heart, of a family that happened in the area of Zola 2. There's an area called Zola 2 in Soweto. I'll actually explain a story about that, something that happened. Yeah, I think that will be it for now. Right, if you enjoyed the story, if you like to hear more stories about this, about my grandmother, can you please like this video? You can share it to your friends. You can subscribe to my channel. You can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter, even on TikTok. At Mjuketi. That's where you can find me. And then, yeah, I think that should be it. See you next time. Thank you very much.